The Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 42 through 48, the Bible says this, "And the Lord said, Who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say unto you, that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. And if that servant say in his heart, My Lord delayeth in his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and drink, and to be drunken, the Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant, which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. But he that knew not, and did commit things worthy of stripes, shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more." This is the word of the Lord. Welcome to another episode here from Right Response Ministries. The title of today's episode is Provision in Times of Famine. And for this episode, I am joined as always by my co-host, Antonio Griffith and Wesley Todd, and we are also bringing on special guest, Bill Armour. Bill, welcome to the show.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
All right, Wesley, you've prepared this episode. Go ahead and start us off.
Well, in the text you just read, it speaks of those who have much, and to those who have much, much is expected. We see this theme all throughout the Bible. Those who have been given a lot, they're ultimately going to be on the peg for more. This is ministers. Ministers are held to a higher standard than just the congregant. They know the Bible more. They've been tasked with teaching it. And so when we look across history and we look at different peoples, there are peoples and individuals that God expects more of. And if we look today, right now, most of you listening to this podcast, you're American. And if you're not American, 5-10% of you, you're at the very least Westerners, whether that be Canada or Australia, or maybe even potentially in Europe. And in that context, when we look at those people, Western people of the United States, and we ask, what category would we put them in? Are these people that have little and they're struggling, or are they people that are rich and have been blessed beyond compare? It is without question that we are the latter. In this parable, in Jesus' teachings elsewhere in the Bible, categorically, you, American, in the year of our Lord 2026, you are the one that has much. We have a lot. And paradoxically, we have a lot, but to challenge at the start here as we think about provision for times that may be hard ahead, we would be in, if you think of Joseph and the times when he's preparing Egypt for famine, we're in the years of plenty. Now, I would argue that the plenteousness that we are experiencing is lesser to a degree than we've had in the past. I think of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. There's an analysis that a boy doing a paper route 4 days a week, 4 hours a day, the equivalent that he was paid in the silver of the quarters was about $60,000. So 4 days a week for 4 hours a day, and he would make in some places and in some contexts $60,000 just as a wage. I mean, there are men out there that work 50 hours a week today that make half of that. So we do not necessarily have the prosperity that we once had, but we most certainly do have opportunity and access to resources. Now, again, paradoxically, as Americans, we have a lot. We have access to food. We have access to pretty good housing, all things considered. I mean, you look at the size of homes in Europe, you look at the size of your flat in Britain, it's not as nice. So we have big homes. We have access to lots of food, but in many ways, we're drunk and stuffed on materialism. We are filled to the brim. Our houses are filled to the brim with much that doesn't have any real value. If I was to take your closet, for example, and this is not everyone, and so some of you, you're not guilty in this respect. But for most of us, if we looked at our closet, we would say, now, is this full of things that if the winter was hard and we didn't have a lot of heat, I would be okay with? Is this full of things, I would think of for women, things that are modest? Is this full of things that have been made well? Most of us would have to be honest that our closets, they represent thousands and thousands of dollars. They're mostly full of junk. If you take your diet in a given week, well, I eat great. I eat like a king. Well, for one, your waist size reflects it. But for two, are you eating in the way God intended? Oh, well, no, actually, we look here and you're eating a bunch of processed stuff. You're eating a bunch of food dyes. You're drinking a bunch of sugary drinks. So we have a lot in some respect as far as what's available to us, where we're able to live. I think of the house. Well, we live in these houses that are big, but the workmanship and the quality and how long they're going to last, it's a fraction of the time compared to homes that were built in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. My cousin has a home, I think it's over 200 years old now at this point, close to. And just the wood and the structures and all of it, yeah, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it was built to last way more than my home that was built in 2023. And so we have a lot, but at the same time, we, especially as Americans, we're very guilty of spending what we have on things we don't need and wasting it, not necessarily on big purchases. So not necessarily buying, I'll use the example of watches because I appreciate them. You can buy a watch that's expensive and say, and this is something for one, it's accurate and it tells time. It's going to tell time for 100 years. It's going to work. It's going to function. It's going to be rugged. This is going to be something I pass down to my children. So you could have one watch and maybe that watch is $3,000 or 15 watches that are all $30, $40, $50. And very much so as Americans, we opt for the latter. We have lots of little things that make us feel wealthy. Well, I feel wealthy because I have 15 watches and I have 30 pairs of boots and 30 jackets. None of them are going to last. None of them are going to be able to be passed down. None of them are rugged enough for if you actually need them for their function. A jacket to keep you warm, a watch to endure under the conditions to keep time accurately. None of them are going to endure, but we store them up and we feel wealthy, but practically of real import, a lot of times we're in debt. And what we have when we get down to it, it's not actually a lot of value. And so what we want to bring across in this episode is we need to be storing, of course, short-term, but also long-term. And what are you storing it in? And if you took an honest stock of your life, and I feel convicted by this, we have to be honest. Well, I can't save or I can't do this. You can, you choose not to. And you choose not to by opting to buy cheap junk from China, filling your house with it. It doesn't make you happy. It doesn't last. It's not worthwhile. And so to dispel the excuse, the argument, I can't save, it's difficult to do, it'd be impossible for me to prepare. You can, you just have to say no. We are in a time of prosperity and you are opting to live short term, opting to live in the moment, to have your cake right now. But when you have your cake, it's impossible to eat it too.
Yeah, I really like that framing too, because it actually demonstrates that there's two things going on. One is the lack of will or lack of desire to actually just store, just to have less of the thing. And then the other is the error of quality, I guess you could say quantity versus quality, which is actually when you do spend, when you do determine to purchase a home or purchase a watch or whatever the case is, what are you actually investing? What are you investing into? Are you taking an expedient route or the easy route of saying, well, I can spend less on the thing and have more money that I can spend on other things? Or are you going to say and treat the purchase as an investment long-term, to your point, something that you could potentially pass down to your children, something that would be actually sort of illuminating with respect to sort of a house and its beauty or land even, right? Do you want a big house on a small plot of land, or you want a small house on a big plot of land? Like all of these things are decisions as sort of consumers, if you will, but also just Christian consumers that we have to be making. And I think the sort of an analysis, a cultural or sociological analysis, demonstrates that we actually do live in a society where all of the incentives are sort of in the wrong direction, if you will. So you speak about debt, right? And we live in a consumeristic society, but even worse, we live in a society that's sort of debt-driven consumerism. So it's credit cards, it's taking out loans on things that perhaps you don't even need. Maybe you haven't done the analysis. Do I actually need this?
Almost every single checkout option, like at Amazon now, I can pay later, whether you are, whatever it is you are buying, clothing, thing for the house, I mean, most certainly mortgages, pay later, pay later,
Well,
pay
and
later.
it's
built right in.
You looked at the stats that they had around the Christmas season. It was just mind-boggling. I think there was $8 billion in sales leading up to the Christmas season. So this would have been sort of early December that were just buy now, pay later programs.
Wow.
And then I think if you look even broader in terms of credit card usage, I think 30% or something like that, don't quote me on it, 30% of all purchases were purchased with credit cards. And then of that 30%, so billions and billions of dollars of commerce, I think about 50% of people said they weren't planning to pay that back within the next 30 days. Yeah. And so this is sort of what we're talking about. It's this cultural influence of consumerism, and you're just Black Friday deals and deals all over, and spend as much money and get your children as many things as you can for Christmas, because that's sort of actually the standard of sort of virtue in our society today. But not only that, do it with a credit card that you don't plan. Do it with the buy now, pay later program. That's sort of predatory lending in practice and exorbitant amounts of usury. And so all of these things come together that to the point of, as a Christian, you really do have to do the sober analysis of, in sort of all walks of life, really all aspects of commerce. What are the ways in which I'm actually being pulled into these things? I'm not doing this analysis that's actually for the good of my family, for the good of my church, and we can even bring in tithing and those sorts of things as well, which are elements that are downstream of sort of prudential, sort of financial resource management. And really you have to recognize you have to swim upstream in our society today.
Bill, want to toss it to you on that thought. Consumerism, our habits as far as spending. What do you think?
Yeah, I would. The two things kind of just popped into my head while you guys were talking there. The first is just this idea that I've heard talked about that, in America, and there's nothing wrong with capitalism or free market economy. Obviously, I think that's the best economic system we have. But it is certainly in America, and particularly, marketing is so driven, consumerism is so driven to a point that it almost feels like there's like a liturgy. And as you guys talk, a liturgy of consumerism is, you worship at the mall, and it's maybe not as much anymore. Maybe it's Amazon, but same idea that people, they are so taught as part of just almost the false idol liturgy of life is that you spend money, you get money, you spend money, you get money, you spend money. And a lot of people probably approach that almost in a way that they approach their faith similarly. So I just noticed that so much for people that they're driven, and we see this across the board, that there is this habit for people to spend and this desire to spend. And then the other side of that, though, because obviously not everyone is so complicit in that, the other side is kind of, I think of the Boots theory, the economic theory, the Boots theory, where the person with less is forced to buy the lower quality sort of Chinese knockoff, let's say, watch, because they can't afford the nicer one. And then that one breaks and they're forced to replace it. And that one breaks and they're forced to replace it. And so, obviously there's two sides to this. There's the people that are overspending and not saving and not being diligent and sort of just wanton buying whatever, garbage is put in front of them. And there's also the people that don't have the ability to acquire the more quality option there and are therefore stuck into a cycle. So, so I think most people lie on one of those two spectrums.
Right. When I think of virtues too, almost every virtue, and we can take money and spending out of it, every virtue has a long-term horizon to it. I think of the discipline to be physically active. You actually don't feel a lot of the benefits short-term. In fact, if you go to the gym, you get off your butt, well, what do you get for the next 2 days? It's like, I did it. I achieved my dream body. No, actually, you're sore. You're like, I went to the gym. I don't look any better short-term, and I'm sore. Why did I even do that? But whether it be catechizing your children, going to church, there's a lot of things and a lot of good virtues. You don't necessarily feel the impact of it short-term, but it's like layers of paper on top of one another as they stack up, as you go to the gym again and again, as you catechize and teach your family, as you make a habit of going to church, as you store up money and stop spending so much, you become the man who he's wise and he plants these trees that he himself may never ever sit in the shade of. But then his children are there and they say, I'm so glad Dad, Grandpa, had this long-term vision. I'm so glad he wasn't day to day, week to week, but he thought 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. What's going to benefit my posterity? What's going to be the best for them? What can I do now that time-wise is just going to have this exponential return? And when I think of virtue, certainly short-term, the denial of self, the denial of the immediate pleasures of life. But there also is I'm not just going to live in the moment. I'm going to be disciplined for my future. I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to be restrained. I'm going to be diligent. I'm going to do these things because these will reap incredible benefits 20, 30, 40 years out.
Yeah. This concept, Bill, that you mentioned, I think you called it boots theory. Actually, I've never heard it sort of framed that way. But this idea of, again, it's a sort of a society wide phenomena of the person who actually desires to do these things and thinking in the long term, they're actually punished in the short term, not only in a sort of in the simplest level, which is sort of what's encoded into nature, which is this idea that, like Wes is saying, virtue is actually painful in the short term. But not only that, you actually have these external forces going back to this economic idea of if I do want to invest in something long term, it's actually more painful just on a natural basis, economic basis. I have to spend more money actually. If I'm in a conservation mindset, I actually have to save more than you would even otherwise have to just to buy the thing that's nicer and higher quality. And I think this is an interesting idea. It's a really shameful thing. You know, people have done analysis of even just capitalism and capitalism's sort of inherent race to the bottom. I need to make things as cheaply as possible and drive production over manufacturing overseas. Someone has done, like, you know, for example, an analysis on, like, what if I wanted to build, for example, something as simple as a hammer in America? And it's just so painful. The cost is exorbitant because we just don't have the capabilities, and we don't have the manufacturing and the skills and the machines and all of these things. And so you're punished even trying to get the high quality thing, trying to just support people in your community and those sorts of things. And so, yeah, I think that's a really prescient idea that people don't really talk about a lot. It's boots theory. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the economic theory of boots, or, you know, but really the idea, I mean, the history behind that idea is, you know, the analogy that's given is, you know, a man goes to work for a living, and he works outside, and every, you know, few weeks his boots get torn up and he has to buy new boots, and he would love to buy a very nice pair of boots that are going to last him for several years, you know, and be, you know, strong and not break. But instead, you know, and those maybe cost $100, let's just say in this analogy. But instead, he's forced to buy a new $10 pair, you know, every other week because he can't save up $100 because, you know, for any variety of factors. Could be, again, maybe it's it's a, you know, a virtue issue, and he is sort of just capitulating and spending money that he shouldn't be, or maybe it's just that obviously the economic odds are stacked against him in such a way, you know, and you see this with people that, you know, they save up a little money and then the car breaks down, and then, you know, so there's kind of this almost this rat race piece that people get trapped into, and so that's kind of what that highlights, and that's, you know, again, I think most people fall into one of those two tracks, and some, you know, there's some overlap there. Obviously, some of that is their own doing, but generally, you know, you're going to see a lot of that is people spending to put themselves in a position where they can afford nicer things, or you know, people not having the income to drive purchases that would be better for them in the long term.
All right, let's go ahead and pause there. That's all well said. Let's go to our first commercial break, and then we'll be right back to continue the conversation. Hey friends, Gray Toad Tallow is a family business making skin care the way that it should be, simple and clean. The company began as a personal mission to find healthier, more affordable solutions to common skin problems without the chemicals that are found in most products today. Now, that search led to crafting balms from grass-fed, grass-finished animals that were naturally rich in vitamins and healthy fats, which is exactly what your skin craves. These balms fight dryness, they calm eczema, and psoriasis, along with other stubborn skin issues, without containing all the nasty toxins. Gray Toad Tallow offers everyday soaps, balms, and beard balm for men. To experience some of their products, grab a balm sample pack. Each batch is made with care in their home and shipped directly to their customers. For skin care, the way that God designed, natural, clean, and effective, visit graytoadtallow.com. Use code RIGHT15 for 15% off your order today. Again, that's graytoadtallow.com. And if you want 15% off, then add the promo code RIGHT15 today. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. Yet your retirement dollars keep shrinking daily as Washington prints money out of thin air. Genesis Gold Group aligns financial guidance with godly principles when others serve only profit. Their faith-centered approach to Gold IRAs stands apart in an industry that has forgotten what true stewardship actually means. Why gamble your family's future on Wall Street's paper promises? Your 401k and IRA deserve better protection. Genesis Gold Group transforms your vulnerable retirement accounts into physical gold, something real, something tangible, something that God created with inherent value. Their faith-driven experts walk you through every step, helping you shield your life's work from the financial storms up ahead. No high-pressure tactics, no hidden fees, just guidance rooted in timeless principles of sound stewardship. So the decision is simple. Watch your retirement evaporate through inflation or secure it in God's precious metal. Take action now. Go and visit rightresponseBibleGold.com. You can visit today for your free book, The Bible and Gold, and join the thousands of believers who sleep soundly knowing their future is anchored in something unshakable. Again, that's rightresponseBibleGold.com, safeguarding your legacy with God's timeless treasure.
Well, welcome back. In the second segment, we wanted to talk about moving forward the times of famine. We talked about the prosperity, the opulence we have right now. But what about if that doesn't last? Now, I will say this. I think we all have that family member. They have been foreseeing, whether it be the collapse of your food networks, the distribution of food, whether it be the collapse of the government, whether it be civil war. They have predicted, 15 of the last 2 crashes. They've predicted food shortage every single year. And we want to distinguish ourselves by saying, for one, we obviously don't know the future, but for two, it is completely possible that you listening to this, that there will never be a time in your life, and this is a blessing, that you can never go 10 minutes away to the supermarket and buy food. It is a real possibility that something like what we're talking about, whether it be the grid going down, whether it be warfare, or whether it even just be a natural disaster, you may never in your life experience it. And so we have a certain freedom of, you don't have to think consistently, the world is falling. Think consistently, well, what if? That's not a great way to live, but also it's also not realistic. Practically speaking, things generally continue on as they have been. However, there's an important caveat. It's one of those things where it's unlikely that a total societal collapse could happen. It's unlikely that a natural disaster happens to you. But when it does happen, it can be so severe and so deadly that you would be irresponsible not to be ready at some level. I think of the hurricane that hit North Carolina. Now that's localized. That's not the federal government collapsing. That's not the grid going down. It's localized. But for weeks, rescuers were unable to reach people. For weeks, people were stuck up in the mountains. People had their homes destroyed and were stranded in the woods miles away from other people. I think of, again, going broader, societal breakdown. Here's one of the most practical, tangible outcomes that could happen. Society breaks down as far as shipping goes, reaching supermarkets, getting your beef in, be it from Kansas, getting your grain in from here, getting your processed goods. If that all breaks down and you have no foresight for the future, you could watch your children starve. That's what could happen. If that happens and you have not prepared and you have not thought ahead, short term, you have no food in the house, no non-perishables, you could sit there and your children would be looking at you saying, Dad, I'm hungry, and you have nothing for them. Now, that doesn't mean, okay, we need to put $200,000 into some type of doomsday bunker in my backyard. But it does mean the prudent man says, this is possible. There is a possibility. It's happened before. It could happen again. There's no food to be found in town. What am I going to do? And I think that mindset, a balancing of, it really might continue as it has. We're not going to sit here and we're not going to be hole ourselves off. We're not going to go out in the woods and be like, it's any day now that the collapse is coming. But saying, if it comes, I have this, I have that. Skills is a big one. I've mentioned food. We had a saying in the military, beans, bandages, bullets. Beans, Food. Bandages. Do I have
Medical.
antibiotics? Do I have whatever it may be, medical side? Bullets, a way to protect myself. Okay, you have these things. Do you have the ability to survive in the woods for 7 days? It's a practical skill. It's not something that you're going to be able to learn the moment you go out and you have to do it. But as far as preparation goes, that's a big one. Do I have the skills? Do I have the resources? Do I have enough also to share? So then I think of my neighborhood. Okay, here's other Christians from my church that live in the neighborhood. I'm okay. Are they okay? Are they preparing things for if that comes? We have a couple families in our neighborhood, and we've sat down multiple times, me and the men, and said, we're going to have this stored here. We're going to have this stored here. Hey, your house, it's the most defensible. It has a second story that we can see out the window. It has a courtyard and walls that are going to be more defensible. This should be the rally point if for some reason we can't communicate with each other. And total combined, we're going to have this food, we're going to have this food, we're going to have this, we're going to have all of these things combined. Here's the weapons, the bullets, the guns, the medical that we're going to have. Here's some of the precious metals. Here's the walkie-talkies. Here's the ways of communicating. Planning. You're looking ahead. And also, you're not drilling it every single weekend. You're thinking, preparing, but also at some level living your life.
Yeah, it's you think about the ditches on either side of the road. So the ones you've already laid out with respect to sort of the doomsday prepper who sort of can't think of anything outside of the frame of like imminent collapse tomorrow, or if not tomorrow, the next day. And then this other sort of oblivious way of living, which I think is the most common in our day and age. It's this idea that it's like things can only continue sort of in this upward trajectory that they've sort of seemed to be going my entire life. But there is this sort of clear biblical imperative. You think about this idea of not worrying for tomorrow, and really the scripture there and what it's laying out is this concept of faith and fear and not necessarily a practical matter, but it's really this middle ground of stewardship and planning, which is to say it's not necessarily fear driven. It's just a recognition of me as, for example, a leader in my home. And you could imagine if you were a CEO, for example, you have to consider base cases and bear cases and understanding the probabilities of each thing and planning for them, not necessarily out of sort of an imminent fear, but more so out of a practical sort of implication for your leadership. And so I think that's sort of where we land is, okay, if I'm going to be a faithful steward, if I'm going to be a steward who actually can plan for different sort of probabilities and outcomes, what are the things that I ought to do? Wes, you've laid out some of these practical means of, well, I need to be able to coordinate. I need to be able to have these resources. But even if you think about it from a financial perspective, you can imagine, hey, I've saved over the last year $10,000, and this $10,000 right now is currently sitting in my savings account, or maybe it's $20,000, whatever the amount is. What do I do with it? Where do I invest it? What are the things that I put it into, the real tangible things? And this is, I'd love to pass it to you, Bill, in terms of this aspect of, okay, we live in an inflationary environment. I, as a saver, I'm punished for saving. Inflation, effectively what it's doing is stealing from people who have money sitting in their bank accounts via inflation, because the purchasing power of the dollar is decreasing day by day by day.
And minimizing debt.
Right.
If you have a bunch of debt, your debt is getting cheaper. If you have a lot in savings, your savings are getting smaller.
And so even as a steward, then you have to consider that element, that very practical element today, economically speaking, which is I can save and save and save. But meanwhile, the fiat currency is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so I have to consider that even and say, okay, well, I want to save, but I can't just save cash.
Right.
I have to put this into something. It has to be an investment vehicle, whether it's land, whether it's sort of precious metal, whether it's stocks, equities, and bonds, and those sorts of things. And then this is where you get into this conversation of financial stewardship. There's this array of things I could put my money into, and I need to be wise about how to do that. And so we'll pass it to you, Bill. Curious what your thoughts are as we think about some of these different elements.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly there are people that can get stuck in the kind of like you guys were talking about, the end is near, and being living in that so drastically that you plan your entire life. around the fact that the world's going to end tomorrow. And then there's the other side of that, which is you live in such a carefree manner that you imagine nothing could ever go wrong. And I think everyone understands that the truth is probably somewhere in between those, that a wise man, a prudent man prepares for the future, but perhaps doesn't worry about it. And that's how I would generally approach this. And obviously working in a metals company, when we help people with this, it's really just the understanding, because it doesn't have to be a total collapse of society per se. It can even just be downturns in the market. I mean, it can be 2008, it can be 2001, and pieces like that. And looking at, particularly for people who want a portfolio that is going to be a little less volatile and want the stability, sort of the firm foundation, economically speaking, then that's obviously where metals can be very, very helpful. Is not to say that they're going to, every single year outperform the market, although some they do, and not to say that they're going to be this terrible investment either. I mean, metals as a whole don't produce anything, so that's one knock against them. But what they do is they preserve value. And I look at, you mentioned fiat, I look at sort of the unequal scales and measures, which is fiat as a whole. I mean, as a system, as a concept, that's what fiat is, right? It's the idea that the government maintains the authority and the ability, or the Fed at least, to create money out of thin air, which, while not literally taking money from you, reducing your bank balance, they are effectively taking money from you by reducing the value of what you have. And so you see, and I think that if we're unaware of that, then we're taken advantage of by that. And so people at least need to have the competence and the understanding, the awareness that this does occur, this is occurring. And so that when you're talking about wealth preservation, when you're talking about general biblical stewardship, you want to at least put yourself in a position to not be have the wool pulled over your eyes. You would want to understand if the scales were unequally measured there. So that's where something like metals comes in. That's where as a Christian man, we look to build our household in such a way that we're going to be able to provide for everyone. So it's not that it's necessarily the wheels are falling off tomorrow. It's that we want to prepare for as many eventualities as possible and do that sort of cost benefit, risk analysis that everyone has to do with any, investment or as they're protecting and preserving their money. So that's kind of how I generally frame it for people is, when you look at the negative possibilities, let's say you have something in metals and nothing happens. Well, what did it cost you? A little bit of an opportunity cost, maybe for some other stock you would have liked, let's say. But on the other side, if things do go wrong, what did it cost you? Very, very little relatively, but it provided, again, a stopgap for what things could have been. So it's all about prudence, and that's what I would drive home to people.
Yeah, that's a great spot to go ahead and go to our second commercial break. Second and final. And then we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about practicals, things that we can do in order to ensure the future and safety for our families, and ultimately to simply be faithful to God. There's only so much we can do as finite creatures. We're not omniscient. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the future entails. And you can be so prepped that you're really just living in fear. And you can also be so confident that you're really just being foolish. And so we'll talk a little bit more about brass tacks and some of the practicals of what is worth doing, how should we store up, how should we invest, when we come back from this final commercial break. How do you want to grow in 2026? It's been said that you will be the same person in 5 years as you are today, except for the people you meet and the books you read. Now, you've probably written down read good books on your own New Year's resolutions. But with millions of new books being published every single year, the question is, where do you start? Well, this January, Western Front Books is introducing a list of over 1,400 books to help you decide. They offer a free curated list of books, each of them linked and categorized so that you, your wife, and your children can find great books to explore. Books that have stood the test of time. From fiction and biographies, history, science, it's all there. So today, go over to westernfrontbooks.com and shop their books. But remember, C.S. Lewis famously said, it is a good rule, after having read a new book, never to allow yourself to read another new one until you have read an old one in between. When it comes to your financial future, are you planning forward or backwards from your desired results? What type of financial culture do you want to create for your family? and for your children's children. We are not called to be wise as doves. Therefore, simpleton planning simply won't cut it. Joe Garrissey helps families develop and implement a long-term culture of excellent financial management. He starts with your goals, your tithing plan, your retirement, and the legacy that you want to build for your generations. And then he works backwards to build a real actionable plan to get your family on track. Now, many of my personal friends have benefited from the financial wisdom of Joe Garrissey that he shared for their specific situations. Do you want to work with someone who strives for alpha with your investing, hates taxes, and brokers insurance? Start planning smart. Call Joe Garrissey at 615-767-2555. Again, that's 615-767-2555. Or you can find him by going to backwardsplanningfinancial.nm.com. Again, that's backwardsplanningfinancial.in as in Nancy, M as in ministries.com.
All right, well, welcome back to this last segment. The one additional piece we wanted to lay out as far as preparation goes, I framed it this way: life, not luxury. You think of Joseph in Egypt. I don't imagine that what they were eating from the cow during that time was bone-in filet mignon, bone-in ribeye, that there was 7 years of famine. The rest of the world is starving. And in Egypt, I mean, every night it's wine and it's grain and it's beef. Things were probably tough there. Now, of course, the provision from the 7 years of plenty that preceded it were what allowed people to get through. And they had the grain and they had what they needed to get through it. But there is certainly a principle there that when we're thinking ahead, that it's not going to be luxurious. To give a practical example, I am not a fan of beans. I would never choose as an adult voluntarily to eat beans. I'll be nice and I'll eat them if someone serves them at a dinner. Now, practically, beans are cheap, they're filling, and they're high in protein. And so, in my closet, much to my chagrin, there are, in my prepper closet, a bunch of packages of beans.
That's
there's
hard
rice,
for me to believe.
There's flour.
Antonio and I go to lunch with this guy multiple times on a regular basis. And I feel like every time we go to a Mexican restaurant, he is always asking for double rice,
No beans.
And so I almost hope for some kind of apocalyptic event, even at the expense of my own children, just so that I can watch Wesley Todd have to eat for days straight beans.
I'll be eating beans, but you'll be out of nicotine.
Ooh. We're in trouble.
We're in trouble. But that is a great example. Like nicotine, you're probably not all said and done storing, just in general, you're not storing the luxuries of life. You're saying, I want to be able to live 6 months. And you can go online.
As of now. After that helpful reminder,
you're calling your wife, babe.
Oh my goodness.
Fill the closet.
Bulk up.
Bulk up.
Yeah.
You can go online. For example, you can say, I have 2 adults in my home and I have 2 children. How many calories, generally, just making it real practical, how many calories do I need for 6 months? Okay, I need this many calories. Okay, beans, rice, flour, water being a big one. Hey, I can actually make that. And think about the security. I think of older folks, and you go to their home and they own their home and they have some land. And if you would go to their garage, for example, they have a generator there, like a natural gas generator. So if a climate disaster comes on them, they're able to power their home. They own the land and it can't be taken away from them if economically they fall in hard times. You go to their garage as well and you see food stored up there. And there's a stability of, man, these people are self-sufficient. We don't have that in our day. And some of it's nice. Some of it's nice to not have to every single year be, taking vegetables that you've canned down to the root cellar and having that all there and chopping wood. There's some niceness. There's some enjoyment to not have to do that the way the pioneers that settled this land did. But practically, there is a stability, even in 2026, to say, I own this land. And what do I have stored up here? I have ways to protect myself. I have ways to eat. I have ways to power. I have medical expertise. And I think that stability in and of itself, it's a good thing to strive for. And what comes of that is, again, I'm not stockpiling I'm going to stockpile all of these foods that would require freezers, and to require freezers, I would require power. So I have to have this elaborate solar system that may or may not be reliable if it's cloudy out. We're not talking about luxury. We're talking about life. But when you have the essentials and the foundation to say, I could live here for the next 6 months. I could live here for the next year. And I would have ways, when a new society erupts, new ways of trading. Hey, I have stored up precious metals here. I have stored up this here. I have stored up this that would be valuable in trading. There's a real security and just peace, I think, that would come with that. And it wouldn't be a worldly or a superficial peace. It would be a good one. You would say, I'm wise. I've prepared for the future. My children wouldn't starve if something happened. I wouldn't be on my own. I wouldn't be defenseless. I would actually be safe and established. We're reading through Proverbs as a family, and again it speaks of the righteous being established in the land, but the wicked, and which you could put in there is the wicked that live day to day, sensually, they're always the ones that never make it. They're the ones that are driven out of the land. They're the ones that are not established. And so that's the final piece of that principle. It's not necessarily about luxury. It's about life. And with that life, being able to sustain life for a long time comes a certain level of peace. Bill, I'm going to pass it to you for the end here. Practicals that you have. So we want these things. They help provide a foundation when it comes to life. We already touched on precious metals. Lay out for us kind of the full gamut. Here it is. My house is secure. I've got this in my closet, stocked up, ready to go. What do you include on that list and why?
Yeah, I mean, I always include obviously some precious metals at home for the disaster scenarios that we've talked about. If we're just talking about immediately what you've got in the closet, so to speak, of course, you've got food, you've got batteries, probably ammunition, a rifle. So, I mean, things like that are probably your emergency backstop there, just in case, even just the power goes out, natural disaster. But beyond that, of course, some level, you could even worry about societal collapse. I would speak even more broadly about, how people approach, we've been talking about finance this whole time. So how people, what they have maybe in the metaphorical closet of how they're preserving their wealth. And so you've got, some in maybe the market. You've got some in dollars, probably keep some cash, most people do. You've got some in bond, maybe you got some in crypto. You've got probably funds all over the place. And those are kind of the different, that can be your ammunition, your rifle, your food, your beans, your rice, all these different things. So, but they all play a part, right? And I would just say that metals are absolutely in that discussion of playing a part. A lot of people don't realize too that there seems to be this fundamental misunderstanding that metals have done nothing or do nothing historically, and they kind of just are there, and maybe they are a last resort. Historically speaking, since we left the gold standard in 71, silver has kept almost identical pace with the Dow Jones, and gold has outperformed the Dow Jones. And people are more than willing to look those numbers up. Gold has far outperformed the Dow Jones now as of late, and silver almost 1-to-1 identically there. So it's not that they are so fundamentally different in returns. It's really how they get there. And I think that's the key piece of why you want this diversity that we talk about, is because let's take 2008, the times that, the market was obviously, in the toilet, was really tanking, metals were doing very well. And so if you were sitting there with a healthy diversification in your portfolio, you were looking at that, and your portfolio really wasn't changing that much, because at the same time that the market was having a tremendous sell-off, your metals were doing extraordinarily well. And so by and large, you would look at these points and you maintain a level of kind of an even float there. You don't sink too low. You maybe don't go as high, but that gives you a fundamental soundness to your investment strategy that I think a lot of people are missing if they're only looking at dollar or dollar denominated assets. Obviously, this is something people need to have their own conversations with, speak to their family, but whomever provides them financial advice. But I always just add that it gives a fundamental comfort to your portfolio and to your understanding when you know that the way that you get there, you've got almost a teeter-totter setup. So in the times that you might be utilizing more of one thing in that closet, you know that you've got something else to make use of, and vice versa. So I just think it rounds everything out. And the most important thing is, again, being prepared for every eventuality. If you have all batteries, but then all of a sudden, you have one generator that runs on gas and you have no, gas or anything like that, then of course, if the electronics fail, then you don't have, you don't have any gas or any extra gas. So I think it's just about having these different fundamental pieces that build up to protection, be that in your immediate home storage for disaster preparedness, or in your financial life for sort of, financial preparedness.
Yeah, people have asked too, and it's important to realize. So with Genesis Gold, for example, if you were to invest or you were to purchase precious metals through them, you physically have the gold. If am I correct, your gold, your silver, your precious metals, you'll physically own that. So that's practically speaking, sure, with a stock or an ETF, you may have a piece of paper that says somewhere out there, this technically belongs to you. But what's unique with precious metals is you have it in your home. I have it here. It's physically on premises. Would that be correct, Bill?
Yeah, that would absolutely be correct. And just for context here, for people who may be watching this and may not know, because this is happening right now, is if you look at silver right now, it's $88. It's quickly approaching $90, which is crazy because we were talking about it, at $20 a couple of years ago. But for context on that, a lot of the reason behind that is there is growing disconfidence, I'll say, or uncertainty on whether or not the physical metal will be able to be delivered, the futures contracts. And so futures contracts are getting moved up. Get a little heady there, but just to understand that right now there is shrinking silver supply. China just said, hey, we're not going to let any silver out of the country. We want to hold on to that. The U.S. obviously put it on a strategic minerals reserve. So countries understand that this is an important metal beyond just a financial metal when we talk about silver in particular. But people, especially the paper silver market, is in disarray right now because there's a lot of uncertainty about physically getting that. And you'll see that actually in the price differential, even in paper stocks like an SLV. However, all of that to say, when you work with Genesis, you are absolutely getting the physical gold and silver. So anytime you would never have that worry or that uncertainty about deliverability or availability, because if you purchase metals from us, you are actually getting that physical metal either to be stored in a depository on your behalf or at your home, as we talked about.
Great. Well, I feel like that was a great episode. Any final thoughts from anybody?
I think we covered it.
All right. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it, your analysis, and just your expertise when it comes to investing. And what we appreciate most of all is that you're not just somebody who's in investments, but you are a solid Christian. We appreciate that. We like working with Genesis Gold because it's coming from a biblical worldview when it comes to storing up, when it comes to investing, when it comes to leaving an inheritance for your children's children. It's biblically based. So thank you so much for coming on the show. To all of our followers, make sure to check out Genesis Gold by going to just look at the details in the show notes below this episode, and we will see you, Lord willing, in the next episode. God bless.